Hi, it's Miss Lisa from the St. Paris Public Library. Welcome back to Just Before Bed, our summer chapter book reading program. This week we're going to start a new book, and the title of this book is Tilly's Moonlight Garden. The author of this book is Julia Green. So we're going to get started with chapter 1 tonight. Something was different. The fox sensed it. Curled up in its daytime hiding place in a nest of brambles, the fox lifted its head. It pricked up both ears to listen. It heard a car and voices. Next, a big moving truck drew up on the road outside the house. Someone banged a door at the back as they opened it. For hours, the moving men went back and forth, carrying boxes into the house. Tables and chairs came next, beds and bookcases, lamps and cushions and rugs. A whole house load of things was carried out of the truck, up the front path, through the open door, into the house. All day the fox tried to sleep, curled up with the tip of its tail wrapped around its body, but its ears twitched, listening for danger. As evening came and shadows lengthened across the grass, the truck drove away. The front door banged shut. At last it was quiet. Just the normal sounds of an autumn evening. A blackbird sang at the top of a tree. A squirrel ran along the edge of the rickety wooden fence. The fox uncurled itself. It yawned and stretched. Silently, on velvet paws, it slipped through the bars of the gate into the garden. No one saw its slim red-brown body and long tail as it stopped at the edge of the lawn to sniff the night air. It looked at the house. The fox called out into the night. It was a strange sound, an eerie, high-pitched scream that echoed around the night garden and made everything afraid. Chapter 2. Tilly's spine tingled. She uncurled her legs from under the blanket, slid off the sofa, and went to the window to look out. What had made that horrible noise? But it was dark outside. All she could see was her own reflection in the glass staring back at her. "Tilly," Dad called from upstairs. "Time to get ready for bed. I'll come and say goodnight later." Tilly opened the living room door. The hall was dark. A tiny bit of yellow light shone in from the street light outside. Through the pane of glass above the front door, just enough to fill the hall with shadowy creatures. The stairs seemed to lead up into a yawning black nothing. Tilly waited in case that scary screaming sound came again. It was so quiet in the house. She could hear tick, tick, tick of the clock on the kitchen wall. She took a deep breath. She made herself step into the shadowy dark. She dashed to the bottom of the stairs, reached up to the light switch and flicked it on. There. Now she could see it was just the hallway, with coats hanging on pegs, cold tiles on the floor, and a staircase with a strip of green carpet going up the middle, held tightly by golden metal rods on each step. Everything in this house was old-fashioned and strange and smelled funny. The ceilings were high up and there were plaster flowers in the middle where the lights hung from. It was much bigger than their old house. It was almost big enough, Tilly thought, to get lost in. The furniture was big and dark too, wardrobes and cupboards and tables and chairs, pictures in heavy gold frames that had belonged to the old lady who lived in the house before she died. The walls had old-fashioned wallpaper with plaster patterns of flowers and birds. They would change all that, Dad said. Paint the whole house, top to bottom, to freshen it up, get rid of some of the furniture that the old lady had left behind, and make the house more theirs, eventually. It would be a good house for playing hide and seek in, Tilly thought, but she didn't know anyone around here to play with, not yet. In her old neighborhood, there were houses where the houses were all joined together and went in steps down the hill. All the children dashed in and out of each other's houses every day after school and all day on the weekend. Her best friend, Allie, lived in the house 2 doors down, and now they were miles and miles away. Tilly went up the bit of stairs that turned the corner, and then along the hallway. The carpet was soft, like moss under her feet. It went in a strip with bare brown boards on either side. She was careful to stay in the middle. The dark wood on either side was shiny like water. She was on a moss bridge going over a river, and if she fell... Tilly stopped outside Mom's bedroom. She listened, not a sound. There was no strip of light shining out from under the door. Mom must be asleep. For a moment, Tilly thought about pushing open the heavy door, tiptoeing in and to kiss Mom good night. But she mustn't wake Mom up. Mom wasn't very well. Just as they unpacked the very last boxes, Mom's head started hurting so much she had to go and lie down. And then it got much worse, and the doctor came, and all Tilly's excitement about moving to the new house got swallowed up in worrying about Mom. The doctor said Mom needed to sleep so she could get better faster, and so that the baby would be all right. The baby was growing inside Mom. It needed to grow a lot more before it was ready to be born in early spring. So please be extra quiet and helpful, Tilly, Dad said when the doctor had gone, because I've got enough on my plate already. Tilly padded out past the shut door, along to her own room. She stretched her hand out through the open gap and switched on the light. What was that scuttling under the bed? She shivered again. She knew what Dad would say. Old houses are full of noises. It's the radiator clunking or gurgling water running along the old pipes. It's only the draft from the window making the curtain twitch. You've such a vivid imagination, Tilly. Tilly turned on the nightlight next to the bed. She picked up her neatly folded pajamas from her pillow and took them with her to the bathroom next door. It was a small room, so you could see all its corners right away, and it was bright with white tiles and shiny faucets, and the towels hanging on the warm rod. Tilly washed her hands and face and brushed her teeth. She put on her pink rose-patterned pajamas and slippers. She padded back to the bedroom and closed the door, turned off the big light, and climbed into bed to wait for Dad to finish his work and come upstairs to say goodnight. The nightlight on the bedside table glowed like a moon. Little Fox was waiting for her, tucked under the blankets where no one else could see him. She knew she was too old, really, for night lights and stuffed animals, but Little Fox was different. Tilly stroked his red-brown fur, and against her cheek. His nose and eyes were shiny bright, and his ears and paws had black tips, but the tip of his tail and his chest were white. Little Fox had been with Tilly forever and ever. She had stroked and loved him so much he had a bald patch on the back of his head. She waited for ages, but still Dad didn't come. The fox called again. Its eerie cry echoed into the night. The sound wove in and out of the night garden and into Tilly's dreams. Chapter 3. In the silvery light of dawn, everything looked different. The shadows in the room were dove gray. The cupboard with the framed photo on it of the last house, her bathrobe hanging on the back of the door, her old toy box, and the shelves of books were all soft gray shapes, as if they were waiting for proper daylight for the real colors to come back in. Tilly listened. Why had she woken up? Had there been a noise? Sometimes she woke up in the middle of the night and she thought she could still hear the echo of some sound, but she couldn't say what exactly she had heard. The house breathed deeply as if it was sleeping. Mom was sleeping. Dad was sleeping. Tilly climbed out of bed. She padded across the carpet to the curtains and pulled them back just enough to make a gap so she could see out of the window. A fox trotted across the lawn below. Its black feet left silver prints on the damp grass. It stopped, looked up at Tilly at the window. For a moment it stood still as a statue, one paw lifted up, ears pricked up, and watched her. It looked deep into her eyes. Tilly pressed her face closer to the cold window glass. The fox turned, trotted on across the grass, and disappeared between two silvery gray bushes. Tilly's breath misted the glass. She rubbed it clear again, but there was no sign of the fox now, just its faint prints left behind in the damp grass. The garden lay still and waiting, full of gray shadows. Tilly shivered. She climbed down off the windowsill and crept back into bed under the warm blankets. Her hand reached out for Little Fox, but he must have fallen out of the bed. Before Tilly could climb out again to find him, she was drifting back into sleep. Tilly thought about the real fox while she was at school the next day. When Dad came for her after school, she nearly told him about what she had seen, but she didn't. She kept the fox her secret. "How's Mom?" Tilly asked him as they went into the house. "Resting, but you can see her later and tell her about your day. Now I've got work to do. Why don't you play in the garden till tea time, Tilly?" Tilly sat for a while on the seat under the big tree in the middle of the lawn. The garden was warm in the afternoon sunshine. Even though it was late autumn, bees buzzed from one pink flower to another in the flower bed next to the hedge. Flies that looked like tiny wasps but weren't hovered over yellow flowers next to a wigwam of sticks holding up withered old bean plants. White butterflies flitted over the cabbage patch. The old lady who used to live here had loved her vegetable garden. "When we get ourselves organized," Dad had said, "we'll grow our own vegetables too." Not cabbage, Tilly hoped. She got up and walked across the grass in the same way the fox had gone so early this morning. The sun had dried the grass, so no prints were left. She found the two silvery bushes and went between them, brushing against the leaves that looked more green than silver now, and left a strong smell on her hands. On the other side there was a metal gate. Tilly peered through. A grassy patch went in both directions, left and right. And just across the other side was another gate, but wooden and tumbled down. Where did that go? "Tilly! Tilly!" Dad called. Tilly ran back to the lawn. Dad put a tray down on the grass next to the seat under the tree. There was a blue mug of tea before him and Tilly's pink mug for her. Dad had made sandwiches. "Peanut butter," he said, "and banana." Tilly wrinkled up her nose. Dad had a funny idea about what tastes nice in sandwiches. "Have one," Dad said. "It's a long time until supper." Tilly wasn't hungry. She hadn't been hungry since Mom got sick. She nibbled the corner of a sandwich. The peanut butter made her tongue sticky and thick and horrible. A small bird flew down from a tree and landed on the grass. It looked at Tilly with its beady eyes, its head to one side. Tilly picked off a crumb of sandwich and threw it. The bird hopped forward and picked up the crumb. It flew back up to the branch above Tilly's head. Crumb by crumb, the bird ate all of Tilly's sandwich. Dad didn't notice. He was busy drinking his tea and thinking. Absent-mindedly, Dad ate the other 3 sandwiches. Tilly knew he was in the middle of writing something, and all he was thinking about was the next bit of his story. That was the trouble with having a dad who was a writer. Most of the time, she didn't mind. Dad slurped up the last sip of tea. He looked at Tilly as if he had only just remembered she was there. "How was school?" "All right," Tilly said, even though it wasn't. "Made any new friends yet?" Tilly shook her head. It was too soon. It was hard starting all over again at a new school with new people. She thought about Allie. She wished she were at the new school with her. "One more chapter and some more tidying up in the attic, and then I'll stop for today," Dad said. "You okay out here by yourself for a little longer?" Tilly nodded. "I like it," she said. "Good," Dad ruffled her hair. "Don't, Dad." Tilly ducked away from his hand. He picked up the tray and went back in the house. Tilly walked around the garden on the ashy path that went down one side, past rows of raspberry bushes, along under the apple tree, and a prickly bit with other fruit bushes, past a stinky compost heap, and then around the other corner and back next to the hedge. Now what? She picked the last rose petals from the bush near the rickety wooden shed. She found an old jam jar on a dusty shelf inside the shed and filled it with water from the outside tap and squashed in the petals and stirred them with a stick to make a rose scent. She put the scent jar on one of the shelves in the shed next to a box of nails and a reel of garden string. She crossed back over the lawn to the metal garden gate and looked through it again. The wooden gate opposite had rusty hinges and no latch. It was rotten and falling off the top hinge, and it was slightly open with a gap just big enough for a slim fox. Tilly wanted to go through too, but not yet. Dad was calling her again. "Time to come in. Where are you? Tilly!" She was glad she had hidden behind the bushes. If he saw her at the gate, she knew he'd say that she shouldn't open it, shouldn't go through. But if he didn't see her, if he didn't actually say the actual words, maybe she still could. Just as she turned away back to the house, she thought she heard something, a snatch of a song in a thin, reedy voice. Someone did live close by then, Tilly thought. Someone who might be a new friend, like Allie. Her spine prickled. It was an old-fashioned sort of song, like something Granny would know. "Hurry up," Dad was calling. Tilly followed him into the house. "When I was sorting through the attic, I found something you might like," Dad said. "What is it?" Tilly asked. "Come and see." Tilly went up the stairs behind Dad, along the landing to her bedroom. An old-fashioned dollhouse sat squarely on the floor in front of the radiator. The walls were made of thin wood, painted a creamy white color. It had 4 green patterned bay windows at the front, 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs, on either side of a green front door. The roof was painted red like tiles, and it had 2 chimneys on either side. "Open up the front," Dad said. Tilly knelt down. The whole of the front of the house opened, so you could get to the rooms inside. There were 2 bedrooms and a tiny bathroom upstairs, and a kitchen and living room, and a hall with a tiled floor downstairs. The bedroom had wallpaper with a pattern of pink climbing roses. There was furniture too, a bed in each room, a wooden kitchen table and chairs, even tiny pots and pans, and a china dog in a tiny wicker basket. Tilly lifted everything out carefully and blew off the dust, and then put it all back again just as it had been before. "The back opens up too," Dad said. Tilly pulled the dollhouse away from the radiator so she could reach around to the back. There were 2 plain wooden doors with hinges on either side. It wasn't realistic, like the front of the house. She opened the doors and found another set of rooms, all empty except for a family of small dollhouse people, a mother, a father, and a girl in faded clothes made of felt with tiny feet in metal shoes. The figures were soft and bendy, so you could make them sit down or straighten them up again or move their arms as if they were doing things. "It's very old," Dad said. "It's probably worth something, but it must have belonged to the old lady, and I'm sure she would want you to play with it." Tilly thought quickly of the girls in her new class at school. None of them would play with dollhouses, not at their age. She could imagine them saying the words, sneering at her, but they weren't here. They would never know. She made herself stop thinking about them. "It's lovely," she said. "Can I keep it here in my room?" "Of course." Then, when Dad went up downstairs to cook supper, Tilly moved everything around in the dollhouse to make it cozier. She put the father doll in the kitchen, she laid the mother doll on the bed upstairs, and sat the girl doll on the chair next to her. That tune was in her head, the one she'd heard in the garden, the thin notes like a bird's song, but in a girl's clear voice, over and over. Chapter 4. Tilly sat on the edge of Mom's bed. It was Dad's bed too, but because Mom was still ill, she was lying right in the middle, her head on a bank of pillows. Tilly didn't like seeing her like that. Normally, Mom would be rushing about, chattering and singing and doing her drawings for college. Mom was going to be an illustrator when she finished college. One day, Mom sighed, as if it was a long way off. When she was better, she was going to turn one of the spare bedrooms into her studio. It would be like Dad's study, only nicer, with boxes of paints and pastels and thick, creamy paper. "What have you been up to?" Mom asked. Tilly thought about the dollhouse in the garden and the rose petal scent, but her voice didn't want to speak, and her throat ached. Dad talked instead. He told Mom about the old dollhouse he'd brought down from the attic for Tilly. It must belong to that old lady who used to live here. "Miss Helen Sheldon," Mom told Tilly. "I met her once or twice when I was little. She was friends with my mother. That's your Nana. She would be pleased to think you have her dollhouse now." Mom stroked Tilly's hair, and Tilly laid her head down on the bed, close to her. She closed her eyes to smell Mom's special scent. In her head, Tilly asked how much longer it was going to be like this, and when Mom could get up again, but her voice wouldn't say the words out loud. There was a lump getting in the way, deep in her throat. "It won't be forever, sweet pea," Mom whispered into Tilly's hair, as if she knew how much she wanted to know. "Thank you for being so good and patient." Tilly leaned in close, and she was nearly asleep, laying there while Mom talked with Dad about arrangements and the new chapter, the words all blurred into one soft hum. Bedtime. Tilly crouched down to look into the dollhouse windows. Everything was as it should be. She opened up the front, put her hand carefully into the kitchen, and pulled the china dog from his basket. She lifted him up close to look at him properly. He had golden fur and a white bib and a long tail, a bit like a fox. A fox wouldn't sleep in a basket under the kitchen table. Tilly put the dog fox down on the carpet outside the dollhouse, looking in. She climbed back into bed. She was sleepy, drifting off almost as soon as she lay down and pulled the blanket up under her ears. The fox padded across the silent night garden. It placed each foot carefully, stopping every few paces to sniff the air, nose twitching, tail held high, stiff like a brush. It looked up at Tilly's bedroom window. She sat as still as a stone, watching it back. Her breath clouded the glass, and in the second it took for her to rub it clear, the fox had gone again. Tilly climbed back into bed. She thought about the night garden and the fox. She imagined him squeezing through the metal gate, crossing the grassy path, and slipping around the gap in the old wooden gate. And then what? Next time, Tilly thought, next time I'm going to follow him and see where he goes. The night light by her bed cast its soft silver glow over the bedroom. Tilly reached out to look at the clock next to her glass of water. 5 to 5, nearly morning. She had expected it to be much earlier, the middle of the night even. The bark of the fox must have woken her up. She thought about Mom, pale against the pillow, and the worried crease on Dad's face, in between his dark eyebrows, when he looked at her. What if Mom didn't get better? What if? Tilly pulled furry little fox closer. She stroked his head with her cheek. Chapter 5. Tap, tap, tap. Dad was busy in his study typing on the laptop. Tilly listened. The taps made a sort of pattern, a rhythm, as if Dad was playing a tune instead of writing a story. The stories he wrote were for grown-ups and looked boring because they were so many words and no pictures at all. Mom wanted Dad to write a book for children one day so she could do the illustrations. Tilly picked out a piece of toast with butter and honey. She was glad it was Saturday and there was no school, but she still wasn't hungry. She took the toast with her into the garden, and the bird flew down from the tree as if it had been waiting for her. The garden was waking up in the sun, but it was still chilly, and the grass was wet with dew. Spiders' webs stretched out like fairy nets across the lawn. Bigger spiders had made traps by spinning long, sticky strings between the bushes on either side of the path. Tilly stopped to watch a speckled brown spider sitting very still in the middle of its web. Spiders were good at waiting. She went to check on the rose-petaled perfume in the shed. The liquid had turned sludgy brown and stank. Tilly chucked it over the ground next to the rose bush in disgust. She hadn't made rose scent after all. She wished there was a swing in the garden, or a tree house, or a pond, or something more interesting than grass and flower beds and an old vegetable plot. She sat under the tree for a while, but it was too cold. She put her hands in her coat pockets and felt something warm and furry. Little fox! She had forgotten she'd put him in there. She fished him out and sat him on the arm of the bench so he could see the garden. His beady eyes twinkled in the sun. Tilly looked around quickly, but there was no one there. No one to see and be mean and tell her she was too old to play games like this. Little Fox didn't like sitting still. Little Fox wanted an adventure. "Come on," Little Fox said to Tilly. "What are you waiting for?" He led the way to the garden gate. He could slip through easily, but Tilly needed to undo the latch and open the gate properly. Tilly looked back at the old house. She could see the windows at the top of one end of the house, but no one was watching. It was sunny and much warmer on this side of the gate. The hedge sheltered the grassy path. The hedge smelled sweet and strange. Now where? Tilly asked Little Fox. So she brought her stuffed animal outside, and he's taken her on an adventure. Little Fox wanted to explore the grassy path to see where it went, but then he saw the wooden gate. This way, Little Fox said. So she's making it look like her little toy fox it's his idea to go through the gate, when really it's just hers. She just needed that little fox to give her bravery. Tilly pushed the gate to make a bigger gap, big enough for her, and it squeaked as it inched wider. It's another sort of garden, Tilly whispered, but the grass hadn't been cut for a long time. It grew tall and papery, almost higher than Tilly. Big, overgrown clumps of purple flowers were mixed in with the grass, and baby trees were pushing up everywhere where seeds from a big tree had taken root. This will be a forest one day, Tilly thought, if no one cuts them down. Tilly pushed through the long grass. Crickets clicked and jumped ahead of her. Insects hummed and hovered and buzzed. She stopped to watch 2 ladybugs climbing down a spear-shaped leaf. Farther along, she found a wild brambly patch with a few overripe blackberries still clinging to the prickly branches. Tilly picked and ate the ones she could reach. The juice stained her fingers red, like blood, Tilly thought. When Tilly trailed her hand along the top of a rough hedge with gray-green leaves, the smell made her sneeze. Lavender. She found a thicket of overgrown roses with a few last pink flowers and huge thorns along the wiry stems. Like in Sleeping Beauty, Tilly thought, perhaps there's a castle on the other side. This was a wild garden. Anything might happen here. A secret garden, just for her and Little Fox to play in. It was a magical garden, Tilly decided, where the sun always shone and she could be happy and safe, and no one would know she was here unless... She thought about the sound she'd heard the other day, like someone singing. Perhaps it had been a bird after all. There was no sign of anyone else ever coming here. It was all overgrown and wild, as if it had been neglected for a long time. But there was much more to explore. Maybe if she went farther in, she would find a house and a girl, a bit like Allie, who would be her friend. She'd been out for a long time. Dad would be looking for her. We can come back, Tilly whispered to Little Fox, but we can't tell anyone else. They might try and stop us. For the first time since they'd moved, Tilly felt a little bit excited.